climate will be the future, whichever way we look at it. And as Africans, we can stand here and say we're victims of climate, which is true, and we're waiting for people to come and help us. Or we can look at what is starting to become a really, really big economy as far as the green economy is concerned, and say, what does the future look like? What's Africa's role in it? And so at Jacob Ladder, the thing that we're doing is asking ourselves, what's the role of young people in this future?
Thank you for tuning in to today's podcast. Today we have a great guest, Bilha Ndirangu, who is the CEO of many companies. And today we will be talking specifically about her work at the Great Carbon Valley. And we are so happy to have you today. Bilha, tell us about yourself. Tell us who you are and what the Great Carbon Valley does.
It's a long question. Yeah. But yes, thanks for having me, and it's actually exciting to have this conversation. So my name is Bilha Ndirangu, as you said. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm a woman of many hats, but to a large extent, a significant portion in the development of Africa and how do we get Africa to develop. And there's a reason I'm starting there. Mm-hmm. I'll get to where I've had carbon Bradley and Jacob's Ladder, which is another big portion at the moment. Done a lot of things. In my background is I'm an engineer by training, and beyond that, I did a lot of consulting, especially impact consulting in my early days. Co-founded a tech company. I worked in education, but now really focusing primarily on the climate space or the green economy space. Mm-hmm. I think a couple of things are two primary companies or two primary organizations that are interesting for me is. One is a nonprofit that I co-founded called Jacob's Ladder Africa that's focused on the intersection between young people and the green economy. Mm-hmm. And the reason why this is important is I truly believe climate will be the future, whichever way we look at it. And as Africans, we can stand here and say we're victims of climate, which is true, and we're waiting for people to come and help us. Or we can look at what is starting to become a really, really big economy as far as the green economy is concerned, and say, what does the future look like? What's Africa's role in it? Mm-hmm. And so at Jacob Ladder, the thing that we're doing is asking ourselves, what's the role of young people in this future? Mm-hmm. And so we're saying that there's a lot of young people who are unemployed. Can we provide them with jobs in the green economy? Mm-hmm. Or what's the preparation that's required? Mm-hmm. So that's the work that we're doing at Jacob's Ladder. And then the Great Carbon Valley, it's an interesting company, but the way we like to think of ourselves is that we're a project development company, a systems integrator that's focus or work on the pieces of the fact that we have significant renewable energy in this country or in East Africa. Mm-hmm. Not often we can get into the reasons for why that's not the case. We have geological conditions that allow us to store carbon. And I don't know, this sounds like science fiction.
I know it's quite a technical space, and I think it's why we have you here. Yeah. So I think if you can get into some of those things, I think that would be great.
For sure. But just going back to, so when the Great Carbon Valley, what we're saying is that we've looked at Kenya, we've looked at East Africa, and seen some interesting potential that can really make us be at the forefront of the carbon removal industry and green industry in general. So industries that are looking for renewable energy, industries that are looking for carbon removal technology. Yeah. And saying, you know what, we'll identify and build what they're calling green industrial parks, and get to attract these companies and say, okay, we are offering you the energy you think, we are offering you the carbon removal and carbon storage that you need. Mm-hmm. Our hope is that we will see really interesting technology starting to take shape in this part of the world.
Bilha, I think this, like you said, a little bit kind of science fiction-y, because sometimes, how it is here in Kenya and on the continent, you hear a lot of these. You read a lot of these papers and you see a lot of these opportunities, and you really ask yourself, why are we not seeing this translate into our economy? And sometimes you have that feeling that, it's always, our West promises something, Africa is kind of going cap in hand and saying, waiting for the West to do something or give us money for it. And it seems to be continue to be the case, right? Which kind of, it's really frustrating, especially around the conversation that says, the biggest opportunity for climate gains are in Africa. So why do we continue to be the people who are looking for support as opposed to the people who actually have the ideas and to have the resources. And coupled with that, when I know you work in education, aren't we at a tipping point where we have been investing in education? I mean, of course, we have challenges. Every place has challenges. But until when are we going to be talking about waiting for us to have the capacity? It's a little bit frustrating for me to continue to have these conversations for decades and decades. What gives?
I think mindset is important. Because at the end of the day, the world is the world. But you can actually wake up one day and decide, I'm going to change things. There's an interesting proverb, it's an Igbo proverb from Nigeria that says that your day starts the minute you wake up. And that could mean you wake up at 2 p.m., that's when your day starts. You wake up at 7 a.m., that's when your day starts. And to your point, in many ways, Africa, and part of it could blame it on colonialism, with a preclinical a lot of things. And refer one from that for us to be saying, one of women's, are based on that. Africa could wake up and should wake up, but that's part of what we've been driving.
I know that Africa has been rising. Everybody in Africa rising. Did we stop rising?
That was interesting. We were just having a conversation about that whole phenomenon of rising. And at some point, the question was Africa really rising? And was a couple of people just sitting somewhere and
decided that this is the narrative.
We'll come up with a narrative and call it Africa rising. And of course, a lot of investments were based on that and had nothing to do with realities on the ground. People burned their fingers and now they're back and say, maybe Africa is not right.
I know.
But going back to your question.
But then we do feel, Evian, as you're going, there is some aspects where you feel like there is an energy. It may be growing, but it may not have, it's only starting to come to fruition, as you say in Swahili, to chemuka, starting to actually really start to be realized. But sorry, go ahead.
And maybe that's an interesting, maybe we can figure out how do we tap into that energy. So when you think about the question around why we've always been victims, and as I say, part of it could have been colonialism, part of it could just be how we, cultured ourselves. And even as the climate conversation was starting to happen, and you still see it right now, which is Africa saying, and it is true, don't get me wrong, Africa going out there and saying, we're not responsible for climate change, all these issues are caused by the North, so the North should pay for it, etc. And that has characterized a lot of our discussions. We go to a lot of these tables, or a lot of these discussion tables, or global negotiation tables, and saying, you need to pay your fair share, you need to give us money, you need to give us money for adaptation, loss and damage. And don't get me wrong, that conversation is to keep happening. But I think it's actually more powerful for you to look at and say, what does the world need? And for once, Africa actually finds herself being at the center of what the world actually needs. So we're in a world that is increasingly starting to decarbonize. And what decarbonization means is that we'll need a lot of renewable energy. What continent happens to have the most sun? What continent happens to have the most wind? Other renewable energy sources. People are starting to think about things like green, electric vehicles, and of course, there's conversations around what are the minerals that are needed to create those vehicles. This happened is sitting in Africa. We're the one continent that's actually growing in terms of talent. Every other continent is shrinking and getting older. We're the one continent that's getting younger. And so increasingly the world will require a lot of labor. And where does that labor sit? In Africa. And so I think if we change our mindsets as Africans and see, in the world that is starting to evolve, we're actually very well positioned to be solution providers. And we can get at those tables, or we can get into those negotiation tables, but not just saying, please give us money. It's sort of saying, that's what you need. We actually have it.
Are we doing that, though?
It's starting to happen. I start to think about some of the 10 of the conversations, even looking at, the previous, a few months ago, we had the Africa Climate Summit. Of course, there can be pros and cons, and we can talk about what it actually really did. But you then begin to have, to then think about the 10 of the conversations where it's able to say, wait a minute, what is this whole new green industry that starting to prop up? Can we have some of that happening in, those investments happening in Kenya or in Africa? So the world is not going to change our minds for us.
We have to take the reins.
We have to take the reins in a way they're going to treat us the way we present ourselves.
Exactly.
So we go and say, please give us money, and they're always begging. Then we are that, and they're mercy. It's someone there. And yes, we'll give you money, but we decide when and how. But if I come in and say, this is what you guys need, and we actually have it, or we know you need XYZ manufacturing, and we have a ton of manufacturing happening here. You talked about capacity, like we spend a lot of money in education. We can argue whether it's been the right way, whether it's right way that we spend money in education, but it's a question of, where this whole economy going? Are we actually educating people right? Should we be rethinking our curricula? Should we be rethinking how industry is paired up to people, to young people? So there's still a lot of work to be done, don't get me wrong, but I think that we need to change our mindsets and say we're going to be providing solutions to the climate problem rather than we're going to come in hand. Then that begins to shift a whole lot of things, curricula, education policy, financing, even how we attract industry, what kind of incentives we put in place, etc.
I mean, that's really critical, and I think that this is part of the work that we do in our firm, because we try to think of our work in public finance as unlocking the potential for public services to unlock the potential of citizens. But then linked to what you said earlier, there was this, and going cap in hand to look for money at the West, and, all the discussions about the IMF and the big IFIs and kind of the conditionalities that come with financing. I think it was COP15 where they committed to providing, developing countries committed to providing 100 billion every year until 2020 for climate finance. That I think we are just a drop in the bucket when it comes to that, which is so frustrating to me, because I keep thinking, why are we waiting? And linked to what we were saying earlier, why are we waiting for people to give us money to do things while we have the resources? But even thinking about earlier what you said about industrialization and African countries do not emit as much carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and we are now at the cusp of starting to industrialize, and when we're there, we're being told, no, you cannot do it the way we did it, and that in the way that has brought us the wealth that we brought us. You have to do it in a different way. Is that an advantage or a disadvantage for us? And given that that was also linked to what I said earlier in terms of climate finance, saying we're going to provide you these resources, so as you're industrializing, you can use more climate-friendly technologies, but that money is not forthcoming. So are we in a space where we're like, look, it's kind of like a dilemma, because if you do continue to harm the environment, we all suffer, right? But if we are not able to industrialize, then, us as Kenyans and as Africans, we will not be able to achieve our economic growth goals in the way that we would like for ourselves.
No, you're right. I think it's interesting to always have debates where people say, should we be allowed to drill our own oil? But countries are saying, if you have oil, can you drill it?
Yeah, always asking permission.
Yeah, asking permission. And I think it's a multifaceted question, and it's one of those things that doesn't necessarily have a right or wrong answer. If I was African, I'm an African, but even an African government, and I was trying to make decisions, I think part of it is being smart around where's the world going and where's the money going. When you have resources and you need to drill them, and you have the resources to drill them, then maybe one could argue that maybe drill them and begin to all utilize them to build your country and grow your country.
Because at some point we also have gap, right? Because we're climate positive, I think is the term.
So we're trying to, and actually doesn't get that achieved. There is something called climate positive growth, and I think it's possible for us. We think it's actually possible for a country to actually grow in a way that is climate positive. Think about Kenya, for example. We are currently at about 93% green energy. So our grid is about 93% green. So, and we still barely tapped, we barely tapped the, our earning potential. There are reasons for that. So one could look at it and say, should we be focusing on fossil fuels, or can we go on this path where we become 100% green, renewable? The world is going to be looking for renewable energy. So if I was thinking about energy development in this country, what I need to be pushing for is, how do we get as much cheap renewable energy as possible that then begins to attract industries and to begin to attract people that are under pressure to make sure that their carbon footprint is lowered. So an example of that is, think about CBAM, which is climate, this EU policy.
Oh, yes.
That's coming up. That's essentially
carbon borders, something. You know it better than me.
It's essentially, I might be simplifying it, but it's essentially a tax on carbon. And what they're trying to say is, we want to make sure that if you produce if your goods have a lot of carbon footprint with their production, you need to pay a certain kind of, I don't use the word tax, but it's actually a tax. But you're essentially paying for that carbon. And so as these kinds of policies are starting to take shape, what's going to happen is that industries are going to start feeling more pressure to become green in how they produce their goods. So if I was Kenya looking at where the world is going, rather than saying, let me do dirty fueling right now for the next 5 years, it's saying, can I set myself up so that in the next 10, 20, 30 years, we become the manufacturing destination of choice? Where people are saying, oh, wait, if I'm looking for cheap renewable energy, where do I go? Kenya. If I'm looking for cheap talent that understands climate, green economy or green industry,
that inspires investments across the value chain, like education.
Across the value chain, whether it's education, whether it's our energy resourcing, our infrastructure, where we're setting up our infrastructure, transportation infrastructure, etc. So don't get me wrong. I think underlying to all this, energy is such a critical part of any economy growing. And like in many of these debates, we should be allowed to grow, etc. How are we not being allowed to?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it all comes down to energy.
Yeah.
And no country can really develop without energy. And even the world really, and even the reason why in this situation with climate change is because of energy. We're burning fossil fuels to drive our cars to electric.
Exactly.
It's all about energy. And so in some way, the way to think about it is that the economy of the future is going to be determined on how energy policies shift. And yes, we do see sometimes when you look at Europe or you look at the global north, we're still using a lot of fossil fuel. It was interesting to watch when, the Russia-Ukraine went and all of a sudden people were realizing, we don't have the amount of gas we're getting from Russia. Where else should we get it?
Yeah.
And of course, there was some pressure. Should we start building in Africa too? So I think there's a way with our conversations, and if I was an African, I don't think it's going to be a blanket answer. So if I'm an African country like Nigeria or Ghana that's sitting and has a lot of energy, we need to be using it and think, okay, how do we utilize this fossil fuel and the people are still buying to develop our country? But I think we should be looking at 10, 20, 30 years, where's the world going? And it is conversations about defossilizing, decarbonizing. How do you find that right balance between let me utilize the resources I have right now, but towards the data that we're in the future. So if we're in a country where we've not even developed the grid, which is most African countries anyway, when you think about our energy access, it also is in the low 20s anyway. So you can either say, let's develop the grid the old way it's always been developed, or say, you know what, I don't want to be stuck with assets that are not going to be usable in the next 20, 30 years. So why don't we just develop a green grid from the one? Why don't you focus your resources on where the world is going?
But can I ask a follow-up question, Bilha, because this is also another sticking point for me, the work that we do. When you think about our geothermal capacity, and that our grid, you said it about 93% geothermal. Green. Let me say green. But you look at the prices that we're paying and the blackouts that we're having. What gives? It's being touted, like green energy is being touted as a solution. It's going to be cheap, it's going to be sustainable, it's going to be available. But that's not the case here in Kenya. So what's the story? What's the story behind the story?
And I think that's what I was saying. If I was a country, what I need to, the world is going to be looking for cheap renewable energy. So again, if I'm sitting in Kenya, the question should be asking ourselves, what's making our energy not cheap? Because it's not as though the sun is being like solar, the sun is heat every day. And it's virtually free. Of course you have to put the panels, but it's virtually free. Same thing with wind. Of course, the question around, and I think it's some of this is historical in terms of how we developed our energy industry over time. These things around infrastructure,
IPPs,
how those were signed. This is about.
So it's really political economy and legacy systems.
Infrastructure in terms of distribution infrastructure. So a lot of the blackouts or brownouts is because of aging infrastructure, especially from the line that takes power.
Tell me about it. How many text messages do I get from KPLC?
So of course there have to be a lot of work that's done to fix that. But the thing is we can't. So the thing is fundamentally energy is not that expensive. But now there's a question around what's the infrastructure, what are the contracts that we'll turn on, and what are the layers, so there are things
exactly. And I think that's really the sticking point, Bilha, because I think that's probably where the story is incomplete when we keep saying that, geothermal is going to be sustainable, it's going to be cheap, there are a lot of kind of ancillary factors that actually hinder us actually achieving that. And I think those are things that even as we're thinking of investing and growing and attracting climate finance to improve our legacy systems and, improve our manufacturing, our grids, right? That we really need to think about in terms of how we formulate policy and how we implement them, and the political economy around that actually hinder us achieving those objectives.
Exactly.
Now, speaking about, we talked about the grid, right? The green grid and leapfrogging and creating. I remember I went for a conference once, and this gentleman from Nigeria was talking about, we can talk about the solar all day. We can talk about how we're putting, wind panels in, windy areas, usually typically remote, putting solar panels in the Sahara, whatever it is. But that's not the end of the story, because you can build as many panels in those places, but how do you connect that energy that's being produced there to the people in the ground in the cities? And I think that's a big challenge, and I kind of the next step or the gap in the market, where if we're looking for infrastructure development, if we're looking for how to take advantage of these systems, we need to kind of fill the gaps. Build the grid that's actually going to transport the energy from one place to the other. Think about, the batteries that store the solar and stuff like that. So are we doing anything towards that? What are the opportunities there, and what are the gaps that we're seeing?
I think there's two things to that. One is, if truly believe, which as I say, we need to build an energy economy. Mm-hmm. Then to exactly what you said earlier, which was where there is things around it. So where should money be going? Where should climate finance be going? Mm-hmm. So I'll give an example. We do have the largest wind farm on the continent in Turkana. So for those of us who are Kenyan and grew up here, for a long time, Turkana was this
remote place where people, pastoralists.
If you ask, your typical Kenyan, where is Turkana? Then
it's somewhere up there.
That's how many years to get there. But someone did the math and said, this place has some of the best winds globally, which actually in practice has proved to be even better than what they thought when they were setting it up. It's worth us building a transmission line all the way from Turkana down to Naivasha, which is Karian, in Kenyan border also so is. And that transmission line was built. Was it expensive? Yes. But once it's built, The good thing about energy infrastructure is if you build it it'll be decades before you have to do it again. But now you have 300 megawatts of power that's actually able to come all the way from Turkana to Russia. And that energy could actually be increased. And so I don't think we cannot run away from the problem. We will need to build infrastructure from where the wind, where the energy is. We've had power, for example, that power is coming all the way from Uganda. We right now have a translation line that's been built all the way from Ethiopia into Kenya. So these things are possible and they can be built.
But are we focusing on those things?
And I guess that's the question to ask. How much of our policy, how much of our financing is really going? Like maybe the question, the question would be how much should we really be putting into it versus what's being put in it. But if we are really serious about saying that we are building a green economy and we want to build our country on the basis of cheap renewable energy, we want to attract industries that are looking for green industry, then we really need to be thinking about what's our energy policy.
100%.
Yeah, we're actually putting into this thing. Yeah. And again, it's a thing where you don't get it in a day. But if I say that I want to make sure that I'm evacuating all this wind that's coming from Turkana, I'm evacuating all this solar that's coming from somewhere else, then maybe it's saying, okay, how much money should I be directing? Whether it's both governments but also development partners, how much money should we be putting in terms of transmission, in terms of building that, in terms of building that infrastructure that's needed. So I think that's one part of it. And the point is, people will build very long transmission lines for longer because power is important. And you think about even so the crazy places people go to dig for oil, like it's in the middle of nowhere,
even in the middle of ocean.
Exactly. Yeah. But because energy is such a critical resource that people are willing to pay for it, the finances can be found to pay for the infrastructure to keep digging for it. So we're saying that we're not going to be selling oil, we're going to be selling cheap renewable energy. Then the same way there's been all these investments into figuring out where can I get oil, then we can actually get the investments to build the right infrastructure and focus on it. But the second bit, and this is kind of speaks to all the work that we're doing at British Carbon Valley, is you don't necessarily need to evacuate all the power from where it is. There's also a question of, can you use the power where it's produced? So we're building green industrial parks, and part of our thesis is we can actually generate power and utilize it within the same vicinity. So rather than having to build infrastructure to evacuate the power from where it is to industrial parks, we're saying, okay, we'll build solar plants or we'll build geothermal plants and utilize the power there. And then now that becomes a way to effectively get or tap the energy resources and use them exactly where you are. And if I think about this from a green industry perspective, so that's part of, we're building green industrial parks, so there's going to be a lot of industry utilizing a lot of power. But also smaller things around, solar is becoming really cheap. So even in your own home, you necessarily need to be connected to the grid, maybe not. So there's also questions around how do you begin to make things like solar and not more accessible. And I mean, it's amazing how much the technology has really evolved, and it's become so much cheaper to get really, really good quality solar panels.
Exactly. People are innovating, even like windows that have.
So that's kind of thing where we also probably need to step away from this idea of you have to build power here and then transmit it there. So if I'm constructing a new building today, why should I not think about getting my windows as solar panels? And so I think, again, going back to the question about mindset. Can we stick our mindsets?
Exactly.
Can we make it, even if because it is like public finance, are there ways to incentivize, developers to make greener choices in how they develop their buildings? Do I get tax incentives for building a building that's green? Do I get,
exactly
incentives do I get for installing solar panels or those kinds of things? So
exactly.
I think we also need to get away from our traditional way of thinking about how energy has been distributed in the past to saying there's so much that has happened over the last few years in terms of the green economy or the green energy space. So how do we incorporate that in our day-to-day? And then it goes back to what I kept saying, which is Africa is not developed. You're actually a really, really good place to be at. So think about, of course, the one example that's always given is the mobile phone.
Of course,
How they had never built all these copper lines
was a big advantage.
So the minute, you just put a thermos and you can serve people, that blew up. So the same way, because we haven't really built infrastructure, can we just meet right from the word go? Unlike countries where they have to almost tear down their old infrastructure to get it up. They must also building.
And I think when you're talking about unsticking policy, that those are the major gaps when you think about, even from the work that we do in supporting the government to come up with policies that work. Getting really fatigued with thinking about how much potential we have, and then you look at the need that we have, and then this big gap of like how do we get that potential actually being realized for the daily, for me, for my family, for my friends, for the people who live here. And that is something that's really frustrating, and trying to figure out how to do that. And I'm hoping that with the work that we do, that can get unstuck. My last question. The global tax that President Ruto proposed, what are your thoughts? 10 marks. At some point he had proposed that we were going to have, he had proposed a global tax and reforms to the IFIs to, everybody to contribute some money to a fund, and then that fund would be used for, climate finance, especially in African countries where it would be most effective. What are your thoughts around that? It's a good idea, not a good idea? Problems, no problems, opportunity?
I guess it's all pretty upcraft. It's all those binary answers. Yes or no. I think it's one of the idea. There's a reason for the ideas, and maybe the way I'd put it is, I'm going back to a question that asked earlier about should Africa really be paying for the fact that we didn't we should climate, but we're all suffering from it. There is something called the social cost of carbon, which no one really pay. Where is it not paying for? What I mean by that is, by virtue of someone emitting a ton of carbon into the atmosphere, whether it's an industry, whether it's me driving my car, whatever the case might be, it then creates this problem that we are all suffering from. So we are all suffering from drought or famine or drought or whatever.
The public bad in a sense.
Public bad, right? Rather, the public good. Anxiety, right? And but the thing is, how do who pays for it? And And so there, eventually what you need to get to, I think, and it's how do you find a way to tax someone to say, yes, you can emit, but you need to pay for their emission. And we need to find out what's that cost of carbon, what's that social cost of carbon globally. Of course, something this now becomes really hairy math, I guess, economists such as yourselves need to figure out. So somehow we have to figure out who pays for that, how do we get people to pay for that? Now, there's questions around how do you enforce it? Do you have a problem where, say, country X enforces it and then country Y is not enforcing it? Then country Y has an unfair advantage, so it's still... And I guess that's part of what the EU, for example, is trying to do with the CBA policy, which is it's effectively not fair for them to say, oh, you're operating in the EU, then you have to pay for carbon, but then you're farming in China or in Kenya and not necessarily pay for your carbon footprint, then you can bring in your goods and competitively, and have an unfair advantage. So I think it's one of those things where, in theory, or the theory behind it makes sense. Like, someone has to pay for this carbon, and the more we can make it that the person who's responsible for emitting is the person paying for it, then either you're paying for your carbon or at least you're incentivized to reduce them. Now we can start to figure out how emissions are reduced. Because right now we talk about reduce. What's the incentive? Why should I reduce? Why shouldn't I stop driving my car? Why should I stop utilizing that fuels, as it were? The issue though is how we enforce it. And I still going to use the same institutions to enforce it and to pay, and
the same problematic institution.
Exactly. And so I think it's one of those things that it's not an easy answer. I was in a conversation with someone a few months ago, a chief climate negotiator for one of the countries, and we're discussing the loss and damage bill that fund that was agreed upon in Sharm el-Sheikh at the previous COP, not this parliament. And it's a great idea in theory. And all this person was saying is, if you think about these kinds of funds, just how long it takes to set them up, how long it takes to administer them. And essentially saying, when the fund comes up, they didn't think it was going to be effective in the next 7 years. Actually, it will be 7 to 10 years from now, because they figure out the governance, figure out how you run it, how you change how you get the money flowing, etc. But don't get me wrong, there's something to be said for this kinds. The same thing like the Global Fund for HIV/AIDS and just exactly the wars in helping countries, especially in Africa. And it continues to be very effective in helping countries plug their gap in HIV/AIDS. So there is something to be said for some kind of fund that can help unstick some of these things. But I think we also have to be deliberate or careful to see how much of this should be public finance driven, how much of it should be multilateral finance driven, and I'm using the term there, and how much of it should be things that the private sector can figure out. So we're not having governments trying to play a role that the markets can figure out, where maybe it's a question of create the right policy as let's come up to Kenya, for example. If you create the right policy as far as energy is concerned, people will invest in energy. You don't necessarily have to now put public financing energy. Exactly. Those who will actually come and invest because they will get a return for it.
Because the incentive is built in.
Exactly. So I think it's important that we figure out what are things that only government can pay for, or what are things that are, when you think about HIV/AIDS, for example, a lot of those things where the money was sitting in the global north, the problem was actually sitting in the global south, and at that point you needed that kind of money to remove money from. So I'm not saying, okay, you need money that says the person that needs a medicine is not the person that can is producing it. So how do I pay the pharmaceutical companies and incentivize them to do HIV/AIDS research and produce drugs, because I need to pay for drugs, people that are suffering in Africa as it were. So there are instances like that where you would need those kinds of global institutions or that kind of global money. There's a mismatch between where the problem is versus who has the money.
Exactly.
So I think we need to be clear around, in climate, what are those things that you need that kind of money versus where is it a question of just create the right policy and private investments. And the problem is if we're not careful, you can crowd out one or the other.
Exactly.
Or you end up having research, or you end up having money that's not being used properly, etc. So I think overall it's a great idea, or the merit to the idea. I think as I said, the devil is in the details. It's how do you break it down? Who pays for it? Which administers it? How does the money flow? Say the money comes to Kenya. Does it go to the government? Does it go to
Private sector? Does it go to?
Does it go to innovators? Because, for example, think about climate. Like we're having to, which come with a lot of solutions for us to figure out carbon removals and just cleaning up the air. You're supposed to come up with that position. Should it be universities? Should it be private sector companies? So I think there's going to be a lot of money that's needed, but it needs to come up in all sorts of ways. From a policy perspective, it's figuring out what's your role as a policymaker to unstick where things are, unstuck, and let funds flow, but the funds could flow from anywhere.
Okay. Bilha, you know, we could speak for days on this. Fun fact, Bilha and I worked together a long time ago, so we were also really good friends. But it has been a really riveting conversation, and I'm really glad to have someone like you in this space. You're well known in the climate space here in Africa and globally. And so we really appreciate having you here, and I hope that you'll come back so that we can continue to have this conversation.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
We definitely had the vision. From the vision, we did the county integrated development plan. From that, we used to draw from the CIDP to the annual development plans. Then again, we came up with systems of ensuring that we did things right. For example, and working with other departments, especially the Department of Devolution, we developed the public participation model that made us work with the people to agree on what they needed.